Hi, my friends. Welcome to another episode of Deep Six, the Deep State. We're really catching on popularity. I was in Arizona last week and I gave a speech, and almost 20% of the audience had been tuning in and watching these, which was just terrific. And they didn't walk out on me, even though they heard the stuff all before. But I was very happy about that. The silence of the lambs is deafening now about Harvey Weinstein. I mean, no comment from Obama, who got $71,500 from Weinstein. No comment from Michelle. No comment from leading feminists. And only after 6 days of silence do we hear that Hillary Clinton is, quote, shocked and appalled by what the revelations about Weinstein. But there was no mention of the impolite matter of returning the $39,000 that Weinstein gave to her campaign. The point about this is not just a partisan game of gotcha. Obviously, the Democratic Party is not committed to sexual harassment and to rape and to all of that stuff. Obviously, Republicans are as likely to be guilty of that stuff as Democrats are. But it's important for us to realize that the centrality of Harvey Weinstein on the one hand and Bill Cosby on the other to the entertainment industry and to the culture of Hollywood. These are two folks who had more power than anybody else over shaping the image of the American family. Weinstein, by his incredible preponderance in the area of entertainment, action movies, family movies, comedies, everything, and he had a real grasp of that and a real hold over it. And of course Cosby, who was the role model for fathers and the role model for black men in particular in their family relationships, although really for people of all races. And they both turn out to be total frauds. They turn out to be rapists and sexual predators and worse than that. And they were never toppled from their high seats in our civilization until a couple of women decided to risk their careers and their lives by going after them and challenging them. And after great effort and nobody listening to them, they finally were able to shout out the truth. Now we have another example of that a little bit closer to home in the guy I used to work for, Bill Clinton. I was watching one of the women's talk shows today, I think it was The View or something, and they were talking about Trump, and they said, look, we did not consciously elect a sexual predator president of this country. And I thought they were talking about Clinton, but it turned out they were talking about Trump. Well, you have no evidence that Trump ever predated on anybody. We do have a list of about 30 women who say that Bill Clinton did, many of whom were state employees, which is a definition of sexual harassment. The very Jennifer Flowers case, going back in time. Ms. Flowers got a job in Arkansas because Bill Clinton arranged it because he was afraid that she would go public on him. And a black woman was in line for the job. And she was shunted aside, and Jennifer Flowers got the job. Now, that's illegal, not for Flowers, but for Clinton, because it is just as illegal to provide favors in return for a relationship than to deny a promotion because they were not satisfied. And I think that whole idea that these liberal democratic role models, be they in politics or in television or in movies, are the arbiters of our culture, and yet we in no way hold them accountable or subject them to judgment. Obviously, if Harvey Weinstein was doing this, everybody in Hollywood had to know it. In particular, every woman in Hollywood. I doubt that there were any women who were involved with him as employees or as stars in their movies who was not aware at least of his reputation, if they were not personally abused by him. And none came forward, none dared talk about it. And a man with this background, with this kind of attitude toward women, with this predatory attitude of use them and abuse them and get rid of them when you're finished, and make sure they don't talk by paying them off. With that kind of an attitude, he's the guy who is telling America's youth what it's okay to be, what it's okay to do. And the power that a Harvey Weinstein has dwarfs the power of any politician. I'll just give you some examples. I believe that a big factor in promoting gay marriage, huge factor, was the way the media constantly showed gay couples kissing and everything else. And I don't object to it. I don't object to gay marriage. But I do think that this was a deliberate effort by the media community to promote that agenda. And I think that it worked brilliantly. It went from totally unacceptable to completely acceptable in a matter of almost a little less than a decade. But we have to realize the power that Harvey Weinstein has. Now, the power of TV executives, the stations, the networks, has been declining sharply. People are no longer watching the major networks. They're tuning off. 20% of cable users have cut their cables and are no longer using cable. And many, many more are no longer watching TV news. The 3 TV news networks have a combined rating on an average night of 12 or 13% of the country watching the 3 combined. Used to be 60. And with that comes a loss of power to shape the culture and shape the environment. But the power has increased, not decreased, in Hollywood because of the video technology, the DVR, the Netflix, Amazon, all of the technology for movies. The movie viewership has escalated dramatically. And with that comes the influence of the content police who oversee the movies. And it is a matter of great public record and importance to examine the morality of those men and women so that we can understand if they are properly reflecting an appropriate conduct for the American people, particularly for young people. And if there's ever a guy that abused it, it's Harvey Weinstein. The stuff is now metastasized from harassment in the casting couch to actual accusations of forcible rape by 3 women. And this is just spreading throughout Hollywood. And you can count on the fingers of maybe now 2 hands the number of women who have spoken out. But I'm sure there are many, many others who haven't had the courage to do so.
Dick, we don't have any questions pertaining to this, but I have some that I saved from yesterday, if you don't mind. Elizabeth Nassel asks, did Bill Clinton's sale of navigation technology to China end up in these new rockets that can hit the U.S.? I heard there are Chinese parts.
Hi, who's asked the question?
Elizabeth Nassel.
Elizabeth Nassel. Well, good for you. I had not thought of that, but I'm sure they were. In the 1995 and 96, Bill Clinton approved the transfer of technology from Hughes Aircraft to or was it not Hughes? Maybe Hughes. It was one of the major aircraft companies, Lockheed Martin, or I'm not sure which one. Approved the technology for the sale from the United States to China, and the guy who orchestrated the sale had contributed huge amounts to Bill Clinton's campaign. I'll research this and I'll come back at you tomorrow. But that's a very good question and worth checking on. Can you remind me?
Yes, I have.
Thank you.
I definitely will.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, and she's asked many great questions before.
That's why I love this audience. I learned
Very
so much.
smart. Richard Real wants to know, in secondary sanctions, haven't European countries been caught after the fact violating sanctions? Saddam Hussein's oil years ago? Question mark, question mark.
Yes, they have, and they've been largely severely punished. The oil for food of Saddam Hussein is not a good example because that was not a secondary sanction bill. That was a UN program that was corrupt as hell. And the son of the Secretary General of the UN was administering part of the program and taking kickbacks from Saddam Hussein for giving them money for the oil that they weren't supposed to do. But the secondary sanctions is different. That's administered not by the UN, but by the Treasury Department. And those guys are fierce in going after the violators. It's a wonderful statement of enforcement, and as I've said before, the key to future world peace. You no longer need to resort to war. You can simply cut a country off from the international banking system, and they're dead anyway.
Well, Susie Q wants, well, first of all, she says, I really love your videos, Dick. Thank you. Very high level
Thank
question.
you, Susie.
Is there hope for USA? With so many forces against Trump, can we make it through?
Yeah, there's tremendous hope for the USA. And thanks for asking a basic question like that. The United States is poised right now and in the middle right now of the greatest upturn in our entire history. Not entire history. Certainly it parallels that after World War II, when we became the dominant economic power in the world, largely based on the destruction of the rest of the world. But that's not going to happen again. But the magnitude of the gain that we're confronting is enormous. Start with the most fundamental thing, oil. The most basic vulnerability the United States has had to Russia, which was the world's leading oil producer, and to the terrorists. Saudi is the second leading oil producer, or one or two now. Actually, they're two or three. The U.S. is about to become one. Really had the United States in a vice because of the oil, our dependence on their oil. We were producing about 7 million barrels of oil a day, and we were consuming about 20. And that 13 million barrels controlled our foreign policy, controlled our spending, controlled balance of trade, controlled everything. Now the numbers are a little different. We're producing, at the moment, something on the order of 9 million barrels a day, and our consumption has dropped to something like 17. So instead of importing 13 million barrels a day, we're importing only about 7. And of that 7, 2 or 3 come from Canada and Mexico, or 4 or 5 from Canada and Mexico, and very little of it comes now from the Arab nations. And in 2 or 3 years, we're not going to be importing anything except from the Western Hemisphere. And that's all because of our own technology and fracking, and that has freed us tremendously. Secondly, we now have a president who is determined not to hold the United States back. The U.S. has been like this incredible racehorse that can easily win the race. But the jockey, the president, is holding him back in millions of different ways. He's holding him back by imposing the Obamacare costs on an economy that would slow it down. He's holding them back by by the power plant rule, where he's phasing out coal plants, which is our cheapest and most immediate source of domestic power, and insisting that we pay much more for energy through recyclable technology. Now, paying more for energy is okay, it's too bad on a utility bill. But when you're going to move from manual labor to automation, you're going to have to increase your electric bill. And the only way we can compete with other countries is to do that. And by charging 2 and 3 times as much for energy, which was Obama's plan, we end up being totally non-competitive. He was holding us back by high tax levels, the highest corporate tax level in the world, one of the highest income tax rates in the world. Now we're going to unleash those reins, and man, that horse is going to gallop down that raceway, and I think outdistance any other country. Does the United States have a good future? You bet we do. You bet we do. We might even become great again. Donald?
That would be wonderful. Rachel Gaskins wants to know, what, in your opinion, is the reason Sessions refuses to go after Clinton, Rice, Podesta, and Obama?
I don't know. I just don't know. I don't get it. He was a conservative senator, a stand-up guy who was forceful in the Senate, forceful on the campaign trail, forceful when Trump appointed him, and then he dropped dead. Now, it's worth noting some good things that Sessions has done. He's reversed the federal effort to take over local police departments and handcuff them and make them unable to aggressively pursue criminals. He's allowing them to stop and frisk. He's breaking away from the civil rights mandate that essentially handcuffed the police and not the criminals. And he also is enforcing the sanctuary cities law and cutting off aid to states and municipalities that try to shelter criminal, illegal immigrants from federal law enforcement, and a variety of other steps. But on the major central issue of government corruption, this guy has been totally and completely AWOL. Now, lest you think that we have any power, you and me and everybody else, look at what's happening to pro football now. After 3 weeks of their slitting their own throats with these demonstrations, pro football has gone from 57 favorable to 44 favorable in a month. And its unfavorables have gone from 23 to 40. So it had a favorable rating of 34%. Now it has a favorable rating of 4%. And it's reflected in people not watching the games and owners having to cut ticket prices. And it's entirely self-inflicted. It's entirely because of their lack of patriotism, their determination to spit on this country that has given them the opportunity to move up. And it's disgraceful, it's disgusting, and I'm so happy that they're being punished. So spend your Sundays with the family. Spend Saturdays watching college TV.
We're number 3 in the world right now.
Well, we're number 3 in the world right now.
And Glenn Rogers...
And don't worry about the other 2. You couldn't speak the language anyway.
Exactly.
One of them I know is Chinese.
Glenn Rogers asks, did the Brits want Hillary since Trump was in favor of Brexit, so they drummed this fake dossier up?
Yes. And I can't say that they dreamt it up. I can't prove that. So I have to be careful here. But clearly the Brits did not want Trump to be president. The opposition to Brexit was key. And as I tried to explain yesterday, it wasn't just that Trump had this opinion that was contrary to the opinion of the British leadership. Britain has gone through a fundamental transformation in the last 40 years from the Churchillian vision of an Atlantic partnership between the U.S. and Britain to the European vision of a continental Europe with Britain included in it. And the Churchillian vision spoke of close relationships with Commonwealth countries like India and Australia and South Africa and New Zealand and Canada. Whereas the European view is don't look at the British Commonwealth, focus on Britain as one of a number of member countries of Europe, country of 85 million people amid an association of 500 million, no big deal. Now, Churchill was very wed to that doctrine. In fact, I don't know if you know this, but when France fell to the Germans in World War II and Britain was imperiled, Churchill and Roosevelt seriously discussed a plan for Britain to join the United States as the 51st state. And both leaders said it might come to that. In particular, what they were referring to is if the Germans invaded and if they occupied England and took over the British Isles, then the government in exile might then be admitted to the Union as the 51st state as a way of standing by Britain while we worked on restoring them to control of their own territory. Well, that vision is kaput now, and everybody was focusing on Europe. And that's understandable, because we had 2 wars as a result of European nationalism. And unless you did something with that nationalism, it was going to cause a 3rd and a 4th and a 5th war. So the visionaries of a united Europe, a guy named Jean Monnet in particular, said, let's integrate the economies. Let's have one economy. And then they said, let's have one currency and one customs union, one labor policy, one immigration policy, and leading toward the day of one government, which was fine. But it forced Britain to cooperate with a lot of countries that don't share its values, that are not democracies, that are authoritarian. I think we need to plug this one in.
Oh.
And that are authoritarian and that Britain wants to be different from. And that led to Brexit. If they had led with continental democracy, if the European Union had said our first priority is making sure, I have one if you don't.
Yes.
I'm sorry, excuse me. In the dining room on the far table, it's a marble table underneath it.
Okay.
Okay. My machine is on low battery, and that's not healthy for my broadcast. So Renee's going to get a plug. But the point is that if they had led with global democracy, European democracy, then you could trust it. You could trust that system. you could say that it's not bad, and that it'll end up in the right place. But when the Europeans barreled ahead on economic coordination and the same labor laws and the same immigration policy, everything the same, but no democracy, they alienated not just the British, but their own people. That's why, for example, when they proposed the European Constitution, and brand new thing with an executive, an elected president, and all of that stuff, it was rejected first in France, then in Holland, and then in the United Kingdom. And they ultimately withdrew it. But they didn't withdraw it. They took most of the provisions and put it in a treaty called the Treaty of Lisbon, which was then ratified by parliaments all over Europe and became part of the European Union after the people had rejected it, but drawing it up as a treaty over which people would have really no authority. And it's anti-democratic garbage like that that has really gotten the EU in serious trouble. Now, we have a little insight here on the whole issue of Russian meddling in the election, because the New York Times has run a wrap-up story that talks about what that corruption, what that infiltration and meddling was. It included disseminating YouTube videos of police beatings on American streets, a widely circulated internet hoax about Muslim men in Michigan collecting welfare from multiple wives, disinformation, a local news story about 2 veterans brutally mugged on a freezing winter night. All of these were recorded, posted, or written by Americans, yet all ended up becoming grist for a network of Facebook pages linked to a shadowy Russian company that has carried out propaganda campaigns for the Kremlin and which is now believed to be at the center of the far-reaching Russian program to influence the 2016 election. This was written during the election. A New York Times examination of hundreds of these posts shows that one of the most powerful weapons that Russian agents used to reshape American politics was the anger, passion, and misinformation that real Americans were broadcasting across social media platforms. The Russian pages with names like Being Patriotic, Secured Borders, and Blacktivist cribbed complaints about federal agents from one conservative website and a gauzy article about a veteran who became an entrepreneur from People magazine. They took these descriptions and videos of police beatings from genuine YouTube and Facebook accounts and reposted them, sometimes highly edited for maximum effect. Well, I have 2 thoughts. First of all, they've been doing that from the beginning of time. I remember when I was a kid, I subscribed to a magazine that was a Russian communist magazine. I think it's called Soviet Life or something. And it was filled with depictions of race riots in the United States and Martin Luther King in jail and school segregation and coal miners who were suffering. And this entire concept of Russian propaganda, of trying to publicize the worst aspects of the United States and broadcast them into the United States to undermine our national cohesion, has been going on ever since World War II. There's nothing new about that, and there's nothing aimed at the election. It's a normal thing that the Russians always have done. And they consider it appropriate. They consider it information. We consider it propaganda, because we know that the very fact that these videos are exposed by a free press and available for the American people to see shows the openness of our society and where it reflects injustice, our commitment to change, and our willingness to improve our system. But is this all you got? Is this the interference in the U.S. election that is paralyzing the American people and Hillary says is singly responsible for her defeat in the election? Are you guys freaking kidding? This is what you're talking about? Oh my goodness, this has been out there forever. And I don't think any of those videos had any effect on anybody. And they were dwarfed by the amount of domestic content, non-propaganda, on the same topics. This article in the Times today detailing the Russian interference is just shocking because of what it doesn't say. It doesn't include anything that really was important interference or that could possibly have influenced the election.
Well, Dick, first of all, I hear this a lot from people, but Michael Salmon says, now I feel like I'm in a civics/political science world history class. Can I get credits for this?
Well, just don't cut the class. Or expect a grade.
And Galen King...
Seriously, I hope that these videos are not too serious. I just believe that in the age of sound bites, you need more than the bite. You need the context. That's what I'm trying to provide.
Exactly. And Richie Hodge wants to know, is there a statute of limitations on going after Hillary or Lynch? Why isn't Trump going after her since he said he would at one of the debates?
Well, he certainly should, and we've been urging him to. And there's a petition on dickmorris.com to get Trump to fire Sessions, so somebody will go after them. Is there a statute of limitations? I think it's 7 years, but I'll have to ask my wife to be sure.
And J.D. Casey wants to know, will the deep state try to take Trump out?
Well, what have they been doing? Ever since this guy was elected, they've been trying to take him out. And they invented this phony issue of Russia meddling and coordination in order to do so. This is entirely, I said in my book, Rogue Spooks, which I hope you're getting, and if you haven't, please buy it. I said this is as close to an assassination of a president as he can get without a knife and a gun. My good friend and strong ally, Steve Bannon, he and I have worked together for a long time and we're very close personally, has now launched a hit campaign against the so-called Rhino Republicans. Rhino, Republican in name only. We have our own animal. There's the donkey, there's the elephant, and the rhinoceros. And the Rhino Republicans are really facing serious primary challenges from strong conservatives, where Bannon is helping find them, fund them, put up the money, and I'm actually working with a lot of those candidates to try to help them get elected as part of what Steve is doing. I was in Arizona, as I told you, last weekend, and met with Kelly Ward, who is challenging Jeff Flake for the Senate seat in Arizona. Flake's opposed all of the good border technology as opposed to the wall and all of that, and Kelly is really letting him have it, and she'd be a good example of that. But you've got a lot of potential challenges. Orrin Hatch in Utah, who has been basically a Democrat, a little bit of a conservative Democrat, but that's about it. And he's facing a challenge maybe from Boyd Matheson, who is Senator Mike Lee's chief of staff. Lee is the other senator from Utah. Lee is the strongest and most aggressive conservative in the Senate, except maybe for Ted Cruz. He's perfect. And if Matheson mirrors his policies, that would be a vast improvement. And in Mississippi, Bob Wicker, who is a sort of go-along, get-along Republican, who's very much like Thad Cochran, the other senator from Mississippi. No, not really ideologically conservative, just Republican, and votes the way he's told by the leaders. And his opponent is McDaniel. I think his first name is Christie, but I'm not sure. McDaniel, who's a state senator who I've met and know and consider a very, very good alternative. And Jerry Moran in Kansas, who defeated a very good conservative to take that seat, now may face a primary too. To understand these contests, listen to what Steve Bannon himself had to say. Only 2 or 3 senators on Capitol Hill have President Trump's back. When you want to talk about why there's no repeal or replace of Obamacare, why there's no tax cut, why there's no tax reform, why there's no infrastructure bill, you saw it right there. Cocker, senator from Tennessee, what's his first name? Cocker, anyway. McConnell, the majority leader, Mitch McConnell, and that entire clique of establishment globalist clique on Capitol Hill have to go. If we need any more proof about what they think, you heard it tonight. It's an absolute disgrace. I don't know, it was on the Hannity show, I don't know what he's referring to. They have total contempt for the forgotten man. They have total contempt for the base. That's what you saw in Alabama when they came in with Luther Strange and $32 million to destroy Judge Roy Moore. You saw what the base thought of them. The base totally rejected them. These people have no respect for the working man and woman in the United States, and I tell you what, Senator Corker is an absolute disgrace. And he called for Corker to resign, and in any case, endorsed Marsha Blackburn, a congresswoman from Tennessee, who was just terrific, either to take his place if he resigned or to run to succeed him, because Corker, thank goodness, isn't running for re-election. Corker, more than anybody else other than the Ayatollah and Obama, is responsible for the Iran deal because he was head of the Foreign Relations Committee, still is. And as you know, the Constitution provides that all treaties have to be ratified by 2/3 of the Senate. The advice and consent of the Senate is the constitutional language. Well, Obama didn't want to submit his treaty to the Senate because he knew he couldn't get close to a 2/3 majority. He knew he couldn't get a simple majority. So he said, I'm just going to make this an executive agreement. Now, the problem with that is it could be repealed by the next president just by a say-so. It would be solely based on the president maintaining his personal commitment to the agreement. And Obama wanted to do better than that. So he got a hold of Corker, and he said, how can we work this out? How can I ratify this without getting a 2/3 majority? And Corker said, you know what we'll do? I will introduce a bill in the Senate saying the treaty is approved, okay? And that won't relate to the treaty. It'll just be a bill that says the treaty's approved. It's not ratification. It's a standalone piece of legislation. And, no, I'm sorry, it was worse. He said the treaty is disapproved, that it is null and void, that we don't want it. And that'll be a simple piece of legislation that will require a majority of each house and will require 60 votes in the Senate because the Democrats are going to filibuster it. And then because we were unable to get 61 votes to kill that bill, it passed, to kill that filibuster, the bill was killed and the treaty was then in effect, in reverse, approved. Do you follow that? He put in a bill to kill the treaty and the bill was filibustered to death. So what he did was, instead of requiring 66 votes to ratify the treaty, or 67, you needed 41 votes to unratify the treaty. It was such an incredibly base maneuver. And now he's saying, I'm the one that made the Iran deal responsible to Congress, because Obama wanted to pass it without even asking Congress. The hell you were. You gave it the status of a treaty, and you jimmied it so it would take 60 senators to disapprove it, not the constitutional requirement of 34.
Dick, Cherie Bloom asks, how about Corey Stewart in Virginia to go against Tim Kaine?
That's a good idea. I think we'll have to look at other candidates. I don't want to get into specific candidates unless Steve, and to some extent I've had a look at them. But we certainly want to challenge Kaine and want to be sure he's challenged with a strong conservative. I ought to note that right now we're mainly talking about primaries, Republican primaries against rhino Republicans who are going to get along with Mitch McConnell.
And Kathy Schultz Chapman asks, why and how does California have the power to defy the White House?
Well, it doesn't, but it can a little bit. California can't nullify a federal law. So when California says we are going to continue to offer sanctuaries to illegal immigrants, it's going to be forced to abandon that because the federal government then will deny funding to California for a whole host of things. And in order to get that money, California will have to back up and surrender. But sometimes California can be the tail that wags the dog because it's so large. So, for example, when Congress votes mileage standards that have to be in cars, California usually votes tougher standards. And the other 49 states have to go along with California because the car manufacturers aren't about to make cars that they can't sell in a tenth of the country, in California. So the tail sometimes does wag the dog here. It depends on what the issue is. Now, Jimmy Carter has offered to go to North Korea again. Oh my God, God save us from that. Jimmy Carter is the reason we're in the mess that we're in right now. It's because of Jimmy Carter. I know, because I was there with Clinton and with Gore when we looked at North Korea and we realized it was on the verge of going nuclear. And our intelligence services discovered an entire new nuclear plant that they didn't reveal that was making heavy water for a plutonium bomb, and this incredible rush to nuclear power. So Bill Clinton screwed up his courage, literally, and said, okay, that's it. We're going to impose total sanctions on North Korea, and we're going to go to war with it if necessary. And at that time, they didn't have the bombs, so a war with North Korea would be a fairly short affair. We could just turn off the oil supplies going there, either by bombing the pipelines or by and blockading the ships, or both, and by cooperation with the Chinese if they would, and we would win the war almost without a shot. But Clinton was committed to that course of action. And I was with him right after he was in the Situation Room. And he came in and he was cursing and almost throwing things. And he said, that effing Jimmy Carter. He went to North Korea. He didn't ask me for permission. He only told me he was going when he was about to board the airplane. And he went there and he negotiated a deal with the regime there, which can't be sustained, it can't be met, it can't be enforced, but it totally pulls the rug out from under me. I can't go to war over that when Carter is saying, oh, peace has been achieved. It was like Chamberlain coming back from Munich and saying, peace is at hand. And when Churchill wanted to increase armament spending, nobody would do it because they said, we have peace. Chamberlain just told us so. Well, the agreement totally unraveled. It was based on the assumption that North Korea wanted nuclear weapons to produce electrical power. And the U.S. agreed to provide them with a lot of oil, build a non-nuclear plant for them, help them build a nuclear plant, but with controls, so it would not lead to a weapon. And North Korea agreed to discontinue construction on everything. Neither side kept its agreement, even for 5 seconds. Congress disapproved the aid to North Korea, and Clinton couldn't deliver it. North Korea resumed construction because the U.S. hadn't given it any aid, and it was all because Carter had moved in prematurely and shot the gun. And now he's threatening to do that again. Heaven help us.
Joyce Asbury, which is a new name I haven't seen here, she asks, what can we do with our senators who are not running until 2020? Senator Cornyn is my senator. I let him know on a weekly basis that if he does begin to support President Trump, if he doesn't begin to support him, he's going to be voted out. But time is on his side. Anything else we can do prior to voting him out?
Well, you're completely right with Cornyn, the senator from Texas. And he absolutely has been a member of the establishment and a puppet for McConnell. You contrast him with Ted Cruz, the other Republican senator from Texas, and it's a night and day difference in terms of their commitment to real conservatism. You have to realize that, I grew up in New York City politically, and everybody there is a liberal Democrat. And it's nothing new to be a liberal Democrat from New York City. You don't have to think it, you just are it. And the same is true of the South. If you're in one of these southern states, it's a normal thing to be a conservative Republican. That's what everybody is. And if you really mean it and you really think about it, like Roy Moore in Alabama or Ted Cruz in Texas, okay, that's cool. But otherwise, you're just in the go-along, get-along crowd, and it happens to be conservative here and liberal up there. You don't give it a second thought. And that's what's the case with Cornyn and a lot of these rhinos we're talking about, who need to go and be replaced by movement conservatives who really mean it and really think about it. Yep.
Anna Teal Strange asks, what does Trump plan to do about veterans' health care?
Well, I've been very disappointed at Trump on veterans' health care because he kept the same guy at the VA who was appointed under Obama. And what needs to be, the reason that veterans' health care is a mess is because the VA wants to keep a monopoly on treating veterans because the doctors there are in private practice at VA. They don't take outside patients. They make their living from it. And the bureaucracy wants to continue to earn a living providing that care, and it wants to shut everybody else out. The answer is to permit veterans either to go to the veteran hospital or to be covered by Medicare and go to any Medicare hospital. Now, McCain introduced a bill to try to do that, but then sold out on a couple of the amendments. And the amendments provide that that's true only if there is no VA facility right near you, or there are a couple of other requirements. And there shouldn't be any such. There is a need for the VA medical facilities because a lot of civilian doctors are not equipped to handle the special cases prevented by the hideous combat wounds that these poor guys and women have had to suffer. And you need somebody very often who specializes in that. But a huge amount of the VA workload, the vast majority, has nothing to do with war. It's heart attacks and cancer and stroke and stuff like that. And as fast as you can get to a good doctor, the better it is, rather than wait for a VA doctor. And therefore, in those cases, people should be able to go to any doctor and earn the right to be treated under Medicare, even though they're under 65. Trump has not proposed that. I hope he will. And in the meantime, he does need to replace the head of the VA. There are two places where Trump needs to act on people. He needs to replace the head of the VA, and he needs to replace the head of the IRS, both Obama appointees.
And Galen King asked, do you think Comey was responsible for ordering and paying for the false dossier?
I know that he was responsible for offering to pay for it, and I know that he was responsible for paying Steele's expenses while he was amassing it. Whether it went beyond that or not, the FBI is refusing to say, and the Senate Judiciary Committee is subpoenaing them, and I anxiously await that result. Now, somebody asked me yesterday, I forget the name, forgive me, about selling insurance across state lines. And I checked it out, and that is in the proposals that Trump is now making to replace Obamacare, to permit policies to be sold across state lines. This is a bill, well, not a bill, because you're not giving it to Congress. It's a series of administrative actions that they're going to take to dismantle Obamacare. One is to cut back on the money we're spending urging people to sign up so enrollment crashes. Another is to permit like-minded associations like truckers or longshoremen or veterans to set up affinity groups, associations, which can then get their own health insurance that would not have to meet the Obamacare standards and would have much lower premiums. The other is to permit anyone to get insurance with lower premiums without the list of qualifications if they can say it is a short-term policy, which means it lasts for less than a year, and everybody should do that. And that'll create a pool of people who are getting low premiums, good coverage, tailored to their needs, and everybody's going to leave Obamacare and join those. And one of the provisions of that is to sell these policies across state lines. Now, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about Bernie Sanders and his program for a single payer. We are not conversant here with how horrible health insurance is in Britain. The Daily Mail on September 30th published an article that said Britain's hard-pressed middle class is being forced to plunder savings and rack up huge debts to pay for vital operations that the National Health Service hospitals are struggling to perform. For decades, England's lack of doctors has caused long waiting periods for needed medical services. Some waits have been up to 12 months. Rationing of medical services is a major component of Britain's National Health Service. Reasons for surgery, minor or major, must be established with pain and possibility of death as the only two factors to be considered. So not knee replacements, not hip replacements, not being in a wheelchair for the rest of your life, but severe pain or chance of death. Thus people live or die with life or death surgery need to have to go pay as you go, private physicians, and only a few can afford to do so. This is all because of the fundamental flaw in Sanders' logic. You cannot expand the number of patients without expanding the number of doctors. Medical care is not something that you can give simply by writing a check. You need doctors to do it, and you need them to be trained and competent and available, and then you can expand medical care. You can't expand the supply you can't expand the demand without first expanding the supply. In the National Health Insurance Bill that Harry Truman submitted in 1947, that's the basis for all efforts since then, it was Title II. Title I was more medical schools. And we have congressional limits now on the number of residencies available. Those need to be repealed. Federal funding needs to go into more medical schools. Forgiveness on student loans for medical education needs to be included in that. And deregulation of much of medical care, so you don't drive doctors out by killing them with paperwork like we're doing now, are all vital components to be enacted first. And then feel free to expand the supply. I've got no problem with all those people getting care. I've got no problem with paying for all those people getting care. I've got a problem with giving those people care, meaning you give everybody else less care because there are not the medical resources to do it. And it's not primarily a financial issue. It's primarily an issue of the number of doctors.
Dick, John Johnson asks, he says, the communists would destroy graves of Nazi soldiers, and so did NVA of the South Vietnamese KIA soldiers. So is the removal of Confederate monuments similar? Why is this part of communist protocol, and how do we combat that, especially since Confederate monuments are indefensible in the current PC environment?
Well, start with the issue. I'm not sure about the uprooting of the graves and stuff, but on the monuments issue, I think that everybody is entitled, local governments and local citizens are entitled to erect monuments to whoever they like. Now, if the monument is inflammatory, like somebody puts up a monument to Adolf Hitler, or somebody puts up a monument to, the Ku Klux Klan in a Klan outfit, that's something very different. But for generals and people who earned their place in history, I think it's appropriate to honor them if the people in that area want to. I personally, as I think I've indicated, do not honor those folks. I consider Robert E. Lee not to be a positive figure because while he was a brilliant military strategist, I think he prolonged the war by 6 months longer than it needed to be. I thought once Lincoln got reelected in November of '64, there was no possibility of a settlement or a Southern victory. And yet Lee continued that war, incurring hundreds of thousands of deaths needlessly. And while he was a general, and therefore under the orders of the Confederate government headed by Jefferson Davis, it was his spirit and his efforts that prolonged it. And had he resigned his commission and said, I can no longer defend sending boys to get slaughtered over this thing, then a lot of lives would have been saved. But that's just my opinion.
Getting back to Jimmy Carter, Robin Hostler asks, can't the U.S. government ban Carter from going, take away the passport?
Theoretically, yeah, but get real, it's not going to happen. Okay. Well, thank you. I have thoroughly enjoyed this. And I have some notes here. First, a shout out to Daisy Nunez and John Cooper for being our most prolific sharers. Sharing is the basis of our being able to get this around to people. It's how we expand this and get more people in. So please share this with your friends. You can even do it during the broadcast. Explain how.
Well, just if you're on an iPhone or even on your computer, to the left of the comment box is a share button. Just click share, it'll share on your page. You can also select people, specific people. And another thing, if you guys are involved in conservative groups, pages, share on those pages too.
How do you share to all of your friends?
They just have to hit share public, and it goes right on their...
Goes to every friend you have?
Yes.
Good, including some you didn't know you had. Some you thought hated you. But thank you to Daisy Nunez and John Cooper and all of you who share and share alike. And I also want the selfie of the day is going to Brandon Lynch, whose photo will be posted on the comments section of today's Deep Six show, holding a copy of Rogue Spooks.
He has 2 copies of Rogue Spooks.
2 copies, okay. The whole question of what was the British role, what was the FBI role in producing the dossier, is all answered in that book. I have 13 reasons why the British were probably helping to cause all of this to happen. So get it and read it. It'll keep you ahead of the game. Thanks for watching.